Hey guys, it's Dr. Jess. Today we're going to be talking about letting go and accepting. And if you know by now, this has been my sort of go-to advice to cope, to reduce your stress level, anxiety, especially in the age that we're living in where things are completely uncertain. Right? You're going to need to learn how to shift your ability to cope from problem solving to accepting. And that work is really done individually with a practice called mindfulness. And so go look up those resources. Mindful.org is a great resource to learn how to start that practice. But with any work that a person does, the emotional work that they do, support system is so important. These are questions that I ask patients in my office every single day. Who is your support system? Who makes up your community? Who is that village? Who is your family? So if you get the message very clearly, I want to know who that is. And so that is going to be an very important part of any work that you do, especially in the work of learning how to let go and accept. And so this safe space is brought to you by The Shy. I have been doing my part to social distance. My husband and I have been taking care of our new baby, and I have been engaging in one of my guilty pleasures, which is watching television. And I've been really impressed with The Shy this season because it touches on so many issues that affect young people, that affect Black people, and I cannot talk about the show without really emphasizing that one of the things that becomes very clear is that family matters. We see that right away when Keisha goes missing. And before I kind of spend time on her family, we got to really talk about Keisha and ultimately was really led to her disappearance. And that really begins with understanding that Black girls, their childhood is erased. We see an erasure of Black girl childhood, and that is through what's called the adultification bias. This bias holds that Black girls need less support. They need less mentoring. Black girls have a bigger knowledge base when it comes to things like adult matters and sex. This bias is really held to girls very early, between the ages of 5 and 14. And obviously you can imagine this has negative impact, a negative implication on their lives very, very early. And so we can all probably imagine that Keisha experienced that growing up in Chicago, and not just there, but in general, we can imagine that this is something that she experienced very early on. So if you want to learn more about the adultification bias, please look up Georgetown University Law. They've done a lot of research and studies on that. And so I encourage you to look that up. So once we have that erasure happen, we also see that even when she begins to grow, right, in her teenage years, Black women, Black girls, Black teens, there's an invisibility that happens, especially when things like this occur, kidnappings, homicide. We see that their stories are not held to any level of importance. And so I want you all to check out a book by the sociologist, great professor, Dr. Cheryl Neely, ultimately called You're Dead, So What? Media, Police, and the Invisibility of Black Women as Victims of Homicide. This is going to cover details very clearly through stories, but also through the data that reflects this phenomena is not unique to The Shy, but this is something that we're seeing. All right. So we're holding space in our mind for this reality, that a reminder that Malcolm X has pointed out, the most disrespected and unprotected person alive is a Black woman. And so we see that very clearly when Keisha goes missing, because no one cares except who? The family, right? It is Keisha's brother, Kevin, while holding space for her, who goes out into, her circle of friends and tries to figure out, where is she? Is she still out doing something that, young girls do? Teenagers should be exploring different parts of who they are and their worlds. There really should be a safe space for young people, for Black girls to be able to do that. And so we see Kevin going out to try to do that. We see her mothers. We see both of them doing what they can to also alert the school, find out, this is unusual for her not to come home. What does the school know? And then when they don't get really a lot of traction there, going to the police. And as we expect, there's not a lot of traction there. And so then they turn to the community. The community is ultimately going to be, along with the family, who rallies and keeps the story of Keisha's disappearance ultimately in everyone's minds. We see that through vigils. We see that through handbills that go up to say, call, notify me, right? We see that with them literally shaking down people that they think have contributed to her going missing. And so it's just a reminder that that family system that you have, right, that support system is going to be so important. This is a worst case scenario. but it's going to be so important because those are going to be the people to ultimately hold that space and care about you as you go through your life, okay? And it's the family and the community that ultimately lead to Keisha's return. But as you can expect, when Keisha returns, she's not 100% herself, right? She is traumatized. I see this when I'm in my office caring for patients who have experienced trauma, whether we call it PTSD or we call it something else. The reality is that trauma has a way of really embedding in the body. There's another great book, How the Body Keeps a Score, that really looks at how trauma lives within our body. And so we're seeing a family come together to try to address this emotional trauma that they're experiencing. Keisha has obvious symptoms. She's waking up with nightmares. She's waking up in a sweat, in a panic. We see her brother Kevin peering in, trying to help his sister, but she's emotionally numb. She's afraid. She's trying to keep her distance as well as she tries to come to terms with this change. She's returning to things that she once knew to kind of help sustain her. And those are things like, her running. We see her trying to do the best that she can to cope. We see her mother's also trying to maintain that same space so that she can begin to heal. But we also see them struggle with the fact that their daughter is not the same. And a reminder for each of you is that it's going to be important if you are experiencing trauma, if you are experiencing psychiatric or psychological symptoms as a result of your trauma, do not stay quiet. Do what you can to lean into your support system, your family. Do things like find support groups. You got to do your due diligence, but find those support groups so that you can get the support you need. Ultimately engage in psychological or psychiatric treatment, therapy if you need to. Do not suffer in silence, okay? But just to take a moment, as we kind of keep in our minds the importance of letting go and accepting, we got to talk about Ronnie. We got to talk about the fact that Ronnie is a part of why Keisha returns home. And historically, you guys know Ronnie is kind of this character that we probably all know, or maybe some of us are, that really has not been able to do things right. He probably is a traumatized individual himself, but we've gotten a very clear sense that he is someone who has suffered a lot, has let a lot of people down, and he has been able to experience atonement on some level in many parts of his life, but especially when he's bringing Keisha back to her family. And so that's going to be an important process of letting go and accepting, learning how to forgive and to properly atone those things in your life that you haven't been able to do right. So we got to shout him out for that. And so the last thing I want to point out to you is just this reminder and this evidence that we see in this story is that the safe space for Keisha always existed. It existed right there in her home. Her family has been maintaining, building, nurturing that safe space for her. And so I want you to think about in your own life, who makes up that safe space for you and who are you creating a safe space for, right? A safe space is going to be that space where a person can be vulnerable, can be themselves, right? We see that with Keisha. When she returns home, she has that space to still be able to adapt, to learn, to ultimately be who she is. And so I want to remind you as well, if there are things that you have not revealed to your family, things that you're kind of holding back, my hope is that in time you will find a way to be who you truly are, because we can see very clearly that family is ultimately going to be that safe space for each of us. And again, family can be those who you bring into your life too. They may not be the people that you were born with, okay? So if you are experiencing any psychological distress, if you are having any questions that you need to be answered by a professional, I want to encourage you to seek help. Please look in the comments. I have some resources there for you. And I want to remind each of you that you are not your pain, you are love. Bye.